He's the T-Rex of political talk. Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
A couple months ago, Texas Monthly, I guess 3 or 4 now, called me, did an in-depth interview. I thought it was going to be a bad hit piece because mainstream media always does hit pieces, but it was pretty fair. I mean, I'd say 80% accurate. And I'd actually interviewed the reporter who exposed Tulia, Texas drug dealing and how they had right at half the black population in the town in the jail owned by the local boss hog. They were planting drugs on him. And that's Nate Blakesley. And then they said, yeah, we've got Dan Winters doing the photo shoot. And I like photography, but I'm not a photography expert or a photography buff, but I knew the name Dan Winters because he's in the top 2 or 3, 4 reporters, not just in the U.S., but in the world. Time Magazine, Newsweek. I mean, you name it. This guy has photographed, all the top politicians, all the top writers, all the top spiritual leaders, Hollywood folks, Brad Pitt, you name it. We're going to be showing some of those images for PrisonPlanet.tv viewers. For radio listeners, they can go to danwintersphoto.com and look at some of these. And so, I mean, I don't know who top photographers are, but I knew who Dan Winters was. And then he built a whole stage, a whole set for me out in his place out in the Texas Hill Country. And then he was telling me, in between the shoots, all these wild stories about different politicians or people he refused to photograph. And so he's here until the end of the show, end of the hour. And so we're very, very honored to have him here with us. Dan Winters began his career in photography as a photojournalist in his hometown in Ventura County, California, widely recognized for his celebrity portraits, scientific photography, and photojournalistic stories. He's won over 100 national and international awards. His wide range of publications and clients include Esquire, Fortune, Entertainment Weekly, Texas Monthly, Rolling Stone, Nike, Microsoft, Warner Brothers, and Sony. And in 2003, Dan was honored by Kodak as photo icon in their biographical Legends series. So he is a photography icon, and he is here with us. Dan, thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Alex. Good to see you.
You bet.
Last time it was under totally different circumstances, but I'm at the receiving end of the sharp stick now, rather than you. So it's good to be here.
Well, I tell you did an amazing job. I mean,
yeah, I was pretty thrilled.
These are some incredible photos. In fact, we'll put some of the photos he took of me up there, and then some of the others. You're here. I appreciate you coming in. I mean, you're on the big conspiracy theorist show.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. The thing about you and the thing about what you do and what you guys do, I think, is that it's more than a full-time job to keep track of all this stuff. And so, the normal Joe goes to work, he comes home from work, he kicks back, he has his beer, he watches Fox News. He doesn't have time to pay attention to this stuff. And so I've always admired people, regardless of where their position was, that kind of really pay attention to this stuff. And, I've dabbled in it, and I think the most kind of almost one of the most sort of insulting or at least kind of patronizing sort of responses that people give me whenever I talk about these issues is, instantly you're like demoted to, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, rather than having like an open-minded conversation about something that you've looked into. It's like, I looked into, Flight 93, for example. I became curious. I'm interested in aerospace. I heard some of the reports. Well, they were making cell phone calls and this and that. And I'm like, well, the infrastructure for a cell phone call from 30,000 feet isn't in place. And it's, I have no idea what happened. It's neither here nor there, but I question it from like a scientific standpoint. Like, well, how did that happen? So I start researching that, and I start researching like capabilities in the Eastern Corridor, altitudes that cell phone signals will reach, et cetera, and it like doesn't make sense, and then there's all these cell phone or communications experts and technicians and, electronics technicians that you can find online that are saying like, hey, it's neither here nor there, but I can tell you right now that no one made a cell phone call from 30,000.
And it came out last year in FBI documents that the Solicitor General had never got a call from his wife and didn't talk to her. FBI admitted that. It came out 2 weeks ago. The ACLU sued and got the documents where Cheney ordered the commission not to look at the attacks, and it was a cover-up. We have 6 of the 10 commissioners saying it's a criminal cover-up. John Farmer. But then we're not supposed to even ask questions as citizens.
I know.
We're supposed to sit down and shut up.
Well, you look at it, too, and you look at the evidence, and you look, oftentimes what happens is with any crime scene is, the first responders are the only ones that get any imagery. After that, it's completely closed off. So they made this, like, ridiculous airplane-shaped pit in the ground ground that had some smoldering embers, almost like they put some charcoal in there and ignited it, and the official sort of FBI, and they handled it as a crime scene. So the FBI handled the site, the FAA didn't, is that right?
Yes.
So they made this really ridiculous looking airplane shaped crater that was smoldering, and that was obviously to sort of, to please the media with, some sort of like visual. And there was this ridiculous diagram that came out that I saw that I wish I had actually brought. That was the official FBI version of how the crash took place and what happened. And so basically what they said is the airplane came down in a straight dive, hit the ground, and the entire plane went under the ground. And they had a diagram they'd drawn.
Meanwhile, separately, the state police said an 8-mile debris field, engines 5 miles away.
I know, which indicates high altitude, catastrophic failure at high altitude, which indicates a missile, obviously. It's kind of like, it's the most ridiculous thing. And once again, my friends instantly, they're like, well, what do you think happened? What do you think this? What do you think that? And I'm like, look, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know how. I can tell you, though, that aircraft didn't hit the ground in one piece, because obviously, an engine isn't going to end up 5 miles away from a crash site. You can look at, crash site after crash site after crash site that, that's been investigated by the FBA, that's widely photographed. And when a plane, breaks up at altitude, the debris field, flight 111 in
Lockerbie.
No, that was 111 was the one in Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
Yeah, that was the...
Well, we know debris fields, even when they crash into mountains or fields, they're normally hundreds and hundreds of yards long.
Absolutely. Contained, reasonably contained, right? But at altitude, the Lockerbie one, how big was the debris field there? Massive.
Yes.
High altitude, burst, etc. So, it's one of those things where it's so insulting. If you do, if you have an open mind, you have an understanding of some of these things, which, I'm interested in these things, and you do 2 hours of research with existing imagery, it's ludicrous that you would try to be sold that line.
Then you've got Building 7.
Well, Building 7, I know you're an expert on. I don't know as much about it, but I have researched the Pentagon one quite a bit. And that's another one that's absolutely ludicrous.
There's no engine holes, and there's a 16-foot hole.
Yeah, there's a 16-foot hole, no engine holes. And if the structural integrity of an aircraft, once it's compromised, those things are made out of thin aluminum. They, once it's compromised, those things will, they'll crush so easily, right? But the engines are these masses, right, of titanium. They're heavy, heavy, heavy. They're not going to break up. It's like if you see any imagery of car bombs in the Middle East, for example, you have the entire car completely disintegrated, right? But there's always an engine block sitting there. That thing does not break up. It's the one piece that stays intact. So, when you see, even on the debris field in Flight 93, right? The debris field's 8 miles wide. There's an engine 5 miles away. The photographs of the engine are the engine is intact. It's an engine. So when the cruise missiles, what I think hit the Pentagon, on either side of that hole, there should have been massive holes, and the windows aren't even broken. It's like the most insulting.
And then later, after hours of fire, part of the roof caves in.
Exactly.
And they try to show that on the news.
I know.
We have hundreds of these big, high-def photos that the government even took, and it's a smoking hole that looks like a perfect missile blast,
exactly.
and everybody smelled cordite. Then they release some blurry image 6 years after that doesn't even show anything and say, there's the plane.
Yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, they had hundreds of high-def cameras. They won't release those.
Right, of course. And the one image that they do release, if you lay a 757 over the size of that image, it's dwarfed. It has a small profile, small signature, and a 757 would dwarf that thing and make a bigger hole, and the wings and the engines. It's like ludicrous. And the fact that it, happened to hit the, mainly unoccupied section of the Pentagon, right? It was under construction.
Why do they think we're so dumb?
I don't know. And, the other thing, too, is I know a lot of pilots. I've flown quite a bit in my life. The idea that, setting up an approach to hit a runway starts 20 or 30 or 50 miles away from the runway, because you get into your approach, you set it up, and you go into like a controlled descent, and basically you fly the aircraft right to the ground, right? So the idea that these guys, and, it's precision. It's precision to hit a runway. It's precision to hit the end of a runway. And so what you do is you take these guys that supposedly took some classes on how to steer an aircraft, and you're trying to sell me the idea that they were able to hit the Pentagon precisely, put it into a controlled descent, get into ground effect, and hit it 12 feet above the ground, perfect, perfect. Like
hundreds of top pilots said they couldn't do that on their best day.
I know. They couldn't even do it. They couldn't be that precise with it because, getting into ground effect where you're riding on that air cushion and riding it right into that.
Even when they've had 50, 60 miles to get ready, you come in and only the best pilots can set them down smooth.
Exactly.
But still, they have to time it just right.
Exactly. And that's why runway's 9,000 feet.
And the plane comes in like this. It doesn't come in near them perfectly.
It's ridiculous. So tell me about Building 7, because you know more about that.
No, Dan, we got you here. That's why I knew you'd be perfect for radio, because you and I were just, really hit it off and we're talking. You said you had a lot of friends that were listeners. And I'm just honored to have you here. And I wanted to talk about some of the interesting stories with celebrities and politicians, and also just get your view on the world and ask how you became such an awesome photographer.
Started when I was a kid. My favorite thing to do. I think the thing I'm most grateful for in my life is that, every day I get up and I do exactly what I love to do. And, I think the majority of the people that are, have an interest, have a hobby, it's an after work and enterprise, it can't be parlayed into a career. And